Well, I guess the first thing I cooked when I was in college in the States, I was in a small town called Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They had no Indian restaurant there. So if I ever got homesick for Indian food, the only way I could eat it was to make it myself. And actually, that's how I learned to cook. I had seen my grandmother making food in the past as a child, and so a few of the things of hers that I loved, I wrote to her and she sent me the recipes. This is in the late 1970s, and so for example, there was a prawn curry, there was a potato bhaji, shrikhand, bhindi, so yeah, so those were the things that I sort of first cut my teeth on, if you will, and it was great because I used to invite friends over for this. You know, they were my guinea pigs. In fact, even the chairman of the religious studies department, who was a Hindu scholar and spent a lot of time in Mysore teaching there too, Professor Tom Hopkins, and I remember he would come over and we'd all eat my early attempts at Indian food. So I think, you know, in the early days, as I was learning to be a chef, and you know, I didn't have any professional training. I learned everything on the job while I was studying biochemical engineering in the States. So I guess some of the early days was tough because I was still in school. You know, I was doing my second bachelor's and then my master's and then eventually 2 years towards my PhD. And so, you know, I had my academic course load to handle as well as working in restaurants. So it was very tough, long hours. I didn't sleep much in those days. So, you know, I would be, every time I got a little break in between orders, I'd be doing chemical engineering, you know, fluid flow problems, homework, stuff like that, standing at the line. So it was long hours, and it was tough juggling both school and work. So that was really tough. I remember in New York, in one of the restaurants where I was, I used to work a full 40-hour week, and that was only on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, on 4 days. So I do a double. On Sunday, I do Sunday brunch and Sunday dinner, and Saturday night I was there till, I don't know, 3, 4 in the morning, because the kitchen, the last order was 2 in the morning. And so I was there till, you know, 4. I never went home. Saturday nights I used to sleep in the restaurant. I'd take a couple of tablecloths over the banquette and use those as blankets and sleep, and then wake up Sunday morning at 7:38 and get ready for brunch. So it was very tough in those days. What I loved most about it, I think, again, in those days, was that you know, while I was in school and in academia, I also got a real solid slice of the real world and how it functioned. I loved the fact that, you know, because I worked, my food and drink was kind of free. I didn't have to pay for quality food and drink, which, as you know, as a starving, struggling student is always a pain. And I guess there was a greater good in feeding people, and I think that's what really drove me. Even now, I live for people at the end of a meal to come up to me and say, "Thanks, Rahul, that was a great meal," and that's what really drives me forward. Well, I think, you know, being a chef involves long hours on your feet. So there's you work when everyone else plays, and you spend the rest of the time gearing up for that. So it's really a 24-hour a day job almost, you can say. Some of the hard things about being a chef is, well, you need to be physically fit. Clearly, you're on your feet long hours. I'm now 61. I don't cook every day anymore. I can't. It's a job for a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old. It's very physically demanding. That's one. The other thing is, I think, to be a good chef, you need to be very motivated, and you really need to be able to sweat the details, and you're constantly looking at ways to improve. You're constantly looking to learn more. You're constantly bettering your technique, your cooking skills. These are all important. Also, being a chef involves a lot of people management. So it's a high pressure job. You can lose your composure very easily. So it's tough to maintain that. It's important to maintain that. It's important to nurture people that you're with rather than belittle them. It's whenever you're working in a restaurant, it's a team effort. And if you antagonize the team, you have no effort, or you have twice the amount of effort to try and get a quality product. So it's very important that you build team spirit, that you build camaraderie amongst your people. The other challenging thing, I think, is, as I was saying, is to be motivated, is to be able to light that fire under your backside every day when you go to work. It's easy to, get, if you've had a string of successes or a period of success, it's easy to get complacent. And the minute you do that, you're in big trouble, because you're only as good as your last meal. And if you get complacent and start slipping up, if a hair winds up in the food, if something is overcooked, if a customer who's been coming to you on a constant basis because they're a regular customer suddenly finds a change in the food, they're going to think twice about coming back. So that's what I meant by you're only as good as your last meal. So it's very important to stay on top of things. You must constantly, in a way, it's like driving a car. You have to constantly be alert, left and right. You have to have 180-degree vision as you drive constantly, and you have to be actively engaged in what you're doing. You can't be passive. So that the motivation, as I said, is a big one, especially if you're also an entrepreneur. If you have to keep thinking about how to grow the business. If you're just a chef and you're coming in for a job, you do your job and you can conceivably go home at the end of that. As a restaurateur, you have to constantly think of ways that you can grow the business, ways that you can keep your old customers coming and get new customers in. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you need to keep yourself constantly, actively pursuing. And that's tough because, we are, at the end of the day, human beings, and we're fraught with, all the human being traits of depression, of moodiness, of all these things, and it's very tough to to overcome all that and keep going every day. Well, I think I love the fact that you're feeding people. To me, food is something that should always take you somewhere. Sharing a meal with people. It's the taste and smell are the strongest triggers of memory of childhood, and so food. Comfort food, for example, is called comfort food because of what it does to you and what it evokes in you. It makes you think back to your childhood, to times of safety and love and compassion and all these things, or to moments of that bring you joy, and to me that's what food does. Also, the act of dining and of sitting down and sharing a meal with family and friends is really the way your heritage is passed down. It's the way traditions continue. It's the way you learn about who you are, and it's the way that you as a family bond. And so to me, these are very, very important things in a person's journey going forward. I don't know that I have one favorite dish. My eating is very mood-based. I have cravings, so anywhere from chaat to sushi, and everything in between. I like food that's made well, and food that's well thought out. Food that has a really nice balance and taste in the mouth. And we're starting to go now towards perhaps what my food philosophy is also slightly. It's basically, I love the whole sweet sour profile. I love this sort of bright acidity that you get from pickling and from fermentation, and I just love that in our food. So I don't have a favorite dish, but I like food that's well made and well balanced and well thought out. Well, I'm an avid scuba diver. I've been diving since 1985, so I've logged thousands of dives. I'm also an instructor, so when I can get away, whenever I go on holiday, I always squeeze in a dive trip. Once a year for sure, sometimes twice. Otherwise, when I'm not in the kitchen, well, I'm a restaurateur, so I have to think about the business too. There is the admin side of it. There's the number crunching. There's the managing of the business side of it. So I spend time doing that. When I'm not doing that, I try and sleep, take my mind off things. I like to read, so I read. I'm a dad, so I hang with the kids. Yeah, that's about it. Okay, so yeah, this is a tough one. This is a crystal ball kind of answer. I don't have an answer because one, I don't know when we'll get a vaccine and if we'll get a vaccine. So until then, we have a new normal. And I think even post the vaccine, people will still be cautious. It'll take several years before things come back to the pre-COVID normalcy that we once knew. The impact on F&B and hospitality, on travel, on tourism is maddening right now. It's an existential crisis whether most businesses will be able to even survive unless they have tremendously deep pockets that come from current funding, or if they've been in business long enough that they have good reserves that they can tide over this period. I can tell you that most new businesses will probably fail unless they get a fresh infusion of capital. There is no way to survive this right now. We have no cash flow. We've had no cash flow since the middle of March. So we're looking now on 3.5 months of no cash flow, of no business. Some of us are doing deliveries. We just started recently, but if you have a restaurant that's based on a dine-in model, you have 2/3 of the restaurant is dedicated to customers coming in, which means you have air conditioning, you have furnitures and fixtures, and the whole front of house, which for a delivery model is going waste. So you don't need 2/3 of the space you have for a delivery model. You don't need to be paying 2/3 of the rent that you're paying for a delivery model. So the fact of the matter is you can never earn enough from just a delivery model when your restaurant was based on dine-in. People, there's a tremendous fear psychosis. People are worried about getting sick, of contracting the disease and such, and even the mandated health requirements to open a restaurant or to travel or to be in a hotel and such are such that you cannot operate at full capacity. You will not be able to do that for a long time to come. You are mandated to be only 50% occupied because of social distancing norms. What that means is if you're full at 50% occupancy, you have only 50% revenue. The restaurant industry functions on slim margins. We have EBITDAs well under 20. Normally between 10 and 17, 18% EBITDA is what we guys operate at. More often than not, it's at the lower end of the spectrum. And this is based on almost full occupancies. If you're operating already at 50%, you're running at a loss. And so you have fixed expenses, you have salaries, you have rent, and you have utilities, which are your three main components. If landlords don't rejig and revisit their rentals, you're not going to be able to survive. If your employees are not willing to take a pay cut, you're not going to be able to survive. If utility companies, power, electricity, phone, gas, all that, are not able to revisit their rates, it's going to be very difficult to survive because, so it's just a mess right now. We can only, at the same time, we have to stay positive. At the same time, we must believe that things will come back to normal. It's a question of when, and not knowing when is also a huge problem for us because we cannot model or predict our business, and it's the not knowing that is the hardest part of all. Whether it's going, if we had a date by when we knew things would come back to normal, like somebody flicking a switch, you go from darkness to light. Unfortunately, it's not going to be that way. So even now, with restaurants being opened up and such, business is not happening. People are not coming out. They're fearful of contracting the disease, getting sick and such. So it's going to be a very long time before any of this changes. Actually, I think it's a great time for India. Sadly, it's going to take a little longer to evolve than it should have because of the coronavirus. But I think there's a huge trust now within India and overseas, with local chefs showcasing and experimenting with and playing around with local regional Indian cuisine. We have a huge, rich culinary heritage in this country, and it is evolved, very complex, stunning, and entirely different from north, south, east, west, And there are a lot of young chefs now who coming out of culinary school, and who are also, there's a handful of them now who are leaders, if you will, leading this whole movement of having turned inwards and looking and evolving our local regional traditions, culinary traditions. Also, I think people are finally comfortable overseas with serving Indian food unadulterated, if you will, or not watered down, but traditionally correct for flavor and spice and such. Whereas in the past, Indian food was always sort of altered for the Western palate. That's no longer happening. There are restaurants in all the major Western capitals of the world serving a traditional, creative menu of Indian regional cuisine, and it's being lapped up everywhere. So I think it's a great future. The time is now. I think that's fantastic. The only thing is, it's going to take a little longer than it should have because of COVID. Absolutely. Again, it's sad that you are hitting the industry in a post-COVID world, because things are never going to be as they were, or it's going to take many, many years for them to come back to what they were before. Having said that, the basis of what you need to do as a young aspiring chef stays the same as it did pre-COVID, and it will continue to be the same going forward. And that is, it's hard work, okay? You've got to put in the time, you've got to put in the hours, you've got to get the experience. You are not a chef after 2 years. It takes years and years of working under various different chefs, learning traditions, learning philosophies, learning ethos, learning cuisine, learning technique, mastering all those things, developing your skill sets. So it takes a long time, a lot of muscle memory, to repetitive working and such, and it just, you have to love what you do, and you have to give 120% of yourself to it every working minute. And even when you're not working, you need to be thinking about it. That's the only way to be a successful chef. As I've said before, you work when everyone else plays, and so if you're not comfortable doing that, or if you are looking to punch in and punch out on the clock, and just do what your bare minimum that you're supposed to do, you will have a job and you'll be a cook, but you will not be a chef, and you will not be a good one. So the only thing I'm going to say to you is, you have to work hard, put your nose to the grinder and just go. Spend the time, take trouble. You have got to sweat the details in order to create perfection, and so that's what you need to strive for all the time. Having said that, it's also a great time to be a chef. I think food in the world that we live in today has never been a more sexy field to be in. Food has restauranting, making food for others, has never been more interesting and more fun right now worldwide. And because of Corona, the way that it's done, the way you can reach out to your publics has so greatly changed. So I think all said and done, it's a great time to be coming out as a chef, but there's no substitute for hard work, long hours, and experience. That's all I'm going to say.